And hello, hearts of oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have Andrew Bridgen back with us again. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Peter, as always.
Always good to have you on. Someone who is independent minded, and always good to get your thoughts. And actually, I was looking back at your campaign when you ran for Parliament last year, and you had five areas: enforcing immigration law, protecting children from militant transgenderism, call time the insanity of net zero, fight the WHO power grab, and expose vaccine harm. And I think all of this, we're seeing some movement pushback, especially in the US. Maybe common sense has yet to break out here in the UK. Although there is one piece of good news in all of that in the UK, and that's the Supreme Court have now told us what a woman is and what a man is. What were your thoughts? Because Keir Starmer's response, it seems though he needed a legal ruling to help him understand the basis of biology. I think that's kind of, it shows the problem with our political system, that our politicians don't know how to think and basically just repeat a mantra.
Yes, the power of the lobby groups and those who control our politicians and their agenda. I did say at the end of one of my COVID-19 vaccine harm speeches that what we really need in our parliament, and it's not just our parliament, it's parliaments around the world, is we need to get the politics out of our science and get some more real science back into our politics. The fact that it took a Supreme Court judgment, and I'm not sure how long the judges pondered over their decision of defining what a woman is. And when a 3-year-old in nursery knows what a woman is or what a man is, and then is accused of transphobia and excluded from nursery, I think that shows you how mad, how crazy our society is becoming. And it's becoming that because we're letting it. And I do recall that I tried to bring in a bill to stop the militant transgenderism in our schools, at least let people get to the age of 18 and then decide what they want to do with their bodies. The Child Protection and Parental Rights Bill, which was voted down by my colleagues from across the House 18 months ago, something which, is very similar to what Trump's brought in America now. And I think I do hope that the old adage is going to come true, that what happens in the United States happens here about five years later. And I think the next general election will be a watershed moment.
Now that's maybe we'll touch on the legal system. Then I want to get your thoughts on vaccine harm and everything RFK has been doing. Jay Bhattacharya has also been speaking on that, and big changes happening afoot in the US. And as you say, I hope it does reach our shores. But just that ruling on the legal side, I know you've had your struggles, your battles, your time going through the legal system. You're in that at the moment. Maybe you want to touch on that, because it's the struggle of wondering, can you use the legal system to rule against the system? And that's the difficulty. And you're in the middle of that battle. Maybe you want to just give us a little bit of an update and touch on that.
Well, I've been in a legal battle with Matt Hancock and others for more than 2 years. Matt Hancock and his legal team desperately don't want him in the witness box under oath answering questions about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. In fact, he's never really he's got no defense after 2 years to his allegations that to counter my claim that he defamed me when he called me anti-Semitic, and that his only reason for that really was to cancel me, silence me, get me thrown out of the Conservative Party for my raising legitimate concerns about the safety and efficacy of the experimental COVID-19 so-called vaccines, and for stopping them being administered in the UK to small children when the government were seeking to approve that in December 2022, a long time ago now. Well, he's tried twice to have my application struck out. He's failed twice. That has taken up so much time. We were at the point of having a case management meeting with the court last November, which would have moved the case forward, then decide the number of days for the final hearing, dates for the witnesses to have their statements in who are going to appear. And he put in another application, which has now failed. But I mean, another 8 months has gone by. But I'm not sure that this delaying tactic is really playing into Matt Hancock's position, because as time goes on, more and more evidence is mounting up about the lack of safety and efficacy of the vaccines, the amount of harms they're doing. And I think we'd be lucky now. We've got to have a CMC sometime after the 15th of June. I'll be lucky to get my final hearing before Christmas this year. But I think before then, RFK and Jay Bhattacharya and their teams in America will have suspended all of the mRNA vaccines. They will have released the data to justify why they're suspending them, which they've got the record level data of doses, dates, and deaths in America, and they will have a full analysis of what they've done to people. I don't think Hancock's going to have a leg to stand on by the time we get into. Which is why he's been so keen to delay and try and get my application struck out. It's a very common strategy by people who've got a lot more money than their opponent, is to drag out the proceedings, increase the costs, and delay justice. And there is a saying, isn't there, that justice delayed is justice denied. Well, the wheels of justice are moving on slowly, but there's no doubt. I mean, Hancock has been pulling, and his team have been pulling favours in the courts. They actually made Hancock's barrister, Aidan Eardley KC, up to a judge on the same bench as the judges who are sitting in judgment of this case during the case. Also, I would point out that there is a little clique here, in that Aidan Eardley KC, who's represented Hancock throughout for the last 2 and a bit years so far, he's also the barrister that the Attorney General chose to send Tommy Robinson to prison, and he's also the barrister that the government keeps putting up every time to oppose Tommy Robinson's appeals. The original judge who put the contempt order on Tommy Robinson was a judge called His Honour Judge Nicklin, and about 8 months ago, Hancock tried with his legal team to get Nicklin appointed to our case, which I objected to on the grounds that I'd been on GB News and vehemently disagreed with the passage of what they call justice in this country delivered by Nicklin, in that Tommy Robinson was serving 18 months in prison for the crime of breach of a civil court order, which is pretty unprecedented. So I managed to dodge that bullet. Thank goodness I did go on and do that interview, because obviously that would have the appearance of bias.
Oh, it would. And my last thought, and follow Tommy closely, and even with Elon Musk's money, yet the system wins. But with this case on Hancock, I mean, it shows the utter stupidity, because an apology early on, and then he wouldn't have been tried. Because now you've got, it's not just Hancock, it's actually everything that's happening in the government can be looked at in this court case. So it becomes much bigger than just one man.
Well, Hancock has made he's made the strategic error of widening the case from the 17 words of defamation and his tweet to in his evidence, which was not signed off by him. You see, Hancock has never signed a witness statement from himself in this case in 2 years. He always gets his lawyers to sign witness statements, because if he never signs a witness statement, he can never be cross-examined, you see. Now, he's very, very canny with that. But they made the mistake of putting in their statement that, of course, everybody knows that the vaccines are safe and effective. So then I had the opportunity to counter that with my own experts and evidence, considerable evidence, hundreds of pages of evidence that they're not. And he actually, during the order, following losing his application to strike out my application again, his barrister tried to argue with the judge to put a condition in the order which would mean that Hancock's side could claim they're safe and effective, and wanted me to be barred from putting any evidence in that they're not. But clearly that wouldn't be justice, would it? Where someone could make accusations and you're never allowed to oppose them. Wow. But that's where he'd really like to get to. I'm endeavouring not to let him to do that. And of course, I'm not really taking on Matt Hancock. I'm taking on Big Pharma and the West, who are standing right behind Matt Hancock. And they are going to hold him up as a human shield until I've burnt all the way through him, because they know what's coming next, don't they?
We're looking forward to that. And you had reposted just the last day or two, and I hadn't seen it, but you reposted Jay Bhattacharya talking about mRNA. He said the next step is to halt the mRNA platform itself. The manufacturer has no idea what dose they're giving, what goes in the body, and whether producing off-target antigens. And that kind of connects with RFK yesterday, the story that he is going to pull COVID-19 vaccines from the kind of approved government list of vaccines. Both of those are key. I mean, how have you seen those developments as probably the only person in Parliament back in the day who actually stood up against this, and now you see all of this happening from the administration?
Well, and I was hoping and praying that Trump was going to get in and who was going to appoint RFK. I'm so pleased that he was approved. And of course, when good people appoint good people, and I was absolutely delighted when RFK appointed and he was approved, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University, an original signatory to the Great Barrington Declaration, to the head of the National Institute for Health. That's Anthony Fauci's former position. And Jay is such a good man. I do know him. And actually, that clip is from an interview I did with him in August last year. And I did actually put a tweet out when I'd beaten Hancock and seen off his latest attempt to stop the court case going forward against him. And I did, sent it to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the NIH, and it wasn't 2 minutes before he came back with congratulations. And I am hoping that in due course, Jay will be willing to put a witness statement into the final hearing, and maybe even appear on video link. That would be very helpful. I would have asked Bobby Kennedy, who I also know, but I think he'd probably be a bit too busy. But I'm hoping that Jay might be able to find the time to attend by video link the Royal Courts of Justice.
That would be a story, and it would be Matt Hancock's biggest nightmare. Well, to add to the nightmare that that you're giving him, there was another story that you reposted, and it's interesting how data is used. And the headline was "Norway exposes cover-up of global death surge amongst COVID vax," and it seems as though they've used some ONS data to actually get that information, and done a lot of research into the background, where I think you get the media skim over and just accept the narrative. They've really delved into that, and reporting the excess deaths skyrocketing amongst the COVID vaxxed. I mean, tell us about the difficulty of getting data, because again, you fought hard to get ONS data, and the UK seemed to be one of the few countries to have data, but again, it didn't want to release it.
Well, I mean, there's the old saying, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's been a constant battle in the UK with the Office of National Statistics. I also found out, Peter, which is just a fascinating aside, that in 2022, the ONS vacated their bespoke premises in London, and they moved into the same building as the Home Office on Marsham Street. You can draw your own conclusions from that. And of course, when I put pressure on the government over the excess deaths, and it took me 26 attempts to get a debate, the first debate, I think, in the world of any parliament on excess deaths, we were suffering 1,000, 2,000 excess deaths a week consistently post-pandemic, when we should have had a deficit in deaths. Well, we never did. We kept having, and you're only allowed in the UK Parliament to put in for one debate a week, and it has to be a sitting week. And I had applied 26 times before I got a debate, and that included then summer recess. It was 9 months, and it came back every week, unsuccessful in ballot. Well, you can see why I don't do the lottery, can't you? In the end, the only way I got a debate on excess deaths was by, in the summer of 2023, I produced a little mini documentary, did some research into the thalidomide scandal. And you can view that on YouTube, Andrew Bridgen on YouTube, thalidomide, the real story. And what I found out is it was withdrawn in 1961. Chemie Grunenthal, a German company, had manufactured it. They'd recruited Nazi scientists, some of whom had been indicted for war crimes but not convicted. Their lead scientist was a gentleman, a lovely gentleman, who was accused of war crimes in Poland under the Nazis, called Heinrich Mulker. And he developed thalidomide. I found out that they actually gave it out for free to their staff before it was marketed. And an employee's wife gave birth to a baby with no ears, but they never said anything. They shipped it out, and we know what happened. 40% or so of the babies died, of the mothers who took, pregnant women who took the thalidomide, and 60% were born with life-changing disabilities. Thalidomide went across the blood placenta barrier and prevented angiogenesis. That's the formation of blood vessels. And the selling point of thalidomide was that you couldn't overdose on it, so they encouraged people to take as much as they wanted. And obviously, the stage of gestation that the pregnant lady took the drug, and the amount that she took was the part of the level of disability or death that the fetus suffered. Anyway, it was withdrawn in 1961. What I found out was that the word thalidomide was never allowed to be mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons until 1972. It was 11 years after the scandal. And those disabled children, those families would have went without any compensation. And their elected representatives declined to talk about it. And there would have been thousands and thousands and thousands of disabled children, which would be very visible within our society. And interestingly, Grunenthal had an injunction on the Times newspaper not to be able to run stories about harms from this medication, which was overturned at the Strasbourg court, and 3 judges there ruled that consecutive speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed all debate and questions on thalidomide for 11 years. And I sent this little documentary to the current Speaker of the House of Commons at the end of summer recess 2023, to Lindsay Hoyle, and with the note that we don't want history to repeat itself, do we, Lindsay? And within 3 weeks, he'd managed to mysteriously find me a slot for a debate. Of course, it was on the end of a week when there was nobody going to be there, or a good excuse for no one being there. But I got it on the record, and the rest is history. But no, it's a shocker. And Peter, don't think that colleagues didn't know. And I'm not stupid. When I stood up to prevent the government from vaccinating small children, I knew there'd be a huge backlash against me, because that's the way the establishment works. I wanted to recruit colleagues to help me. And the number of colleagues who agreed in November 22 that the vaccines were hurting people, they'd had a couple and they'd had side effects. One guy told me he'd had 2 heart attacks after 2 Pfizers and still wouldn't speak out. Another lady told me that her sister was paralyzed from the neck down after a Moderna booster and wouldn't speak out. Another one's wife came to me and said, I told him not to take them. He's got a heart problem. And he promised me he was going to speak out, but none of them ever did. And we're supposed to speak in the chamber of the House of Commons without fear or favour. And there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of favour. And as I've gone on the record and say, I think it was January 22, I was offered a bribe of anything I wanted. Just tell us what you want and shut up. And then once I found out that was the game we're playing, I told him, and the only thing I wanted was the Prime Minister's resignation letter in that case. And apparently I couldn't have that, so I didn't want anything else. But I mean, it's pathetic. We do not have the democracy you think. This is why we have so many scandals and so many adverse events against the public. So it took me 10 years to expose the post office scandal. I had all the evidence 10 years ago. No media would run with it. And I was told by a grandee of the Conservative Party that, they wanted to cover up the vaccine harms for 20 years. That was in January 23. And I walked out the room and said, you're not going to get 20 months and you're not jabbing the children. And of course, although the government will deny it, there was only me standing up and opposing it. They never dared authorise those horrendous toxic vaccines for the under fives in the UK, where they did it around most of the rest of the world. And if losing my political career, as they said, and what career? If I couldn't stand up for small children, and that would have saved the lives of thousands, that was worth it. It's absolutely worth it every day of the week.
You mentioned you mentioned about colleagues and vaccine harms and not speaking out. When you look at the US, you've had silence on different things. They've got a mass lobby industry in terms of farm and food, and the war machine. We don't really have that kind of lobby groups here in the UK, but it seems to be more blackmail and groupthink. I don't know.
Well, it's actually done through the party system, you see, Peter. So it's done through the whipping system. So the corruption is at the very top, which allows party leaders to cut deals. I've also found out, after I was no longer an MP, that an MP can receive monies from anybody if it's designated to help them with their work, tax-free. That's a briber's charter. Nobody else can get money given to them. So I could have taken £2 million into my back pocket from Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca to shut up, and just declared it as something to help my work, and not paid any tax on it and spent it on what I wanted. Well, I mean, you can see why that's all been set up, can't you? But it is the top of the parties, and of course it's the whipping system. And unfortunately, with the whipping system, people who want to get on in the political game, you get on in the game by doing what's right for your political party, not doing what's right for your people. And that's just a huge conflict of interest. And that's how you end up with, a Conservative grandee saying to me in January 23, when I went to them for helps and explained all the science about NG163 and the involuntary euthanasia of tens of thousands of vulnerable elderly to create the first wave of vaccine deaths, and the vaccines themselves and the lack of safety and efficacy. Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind that you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you which that will entail. And then, of course, they put out some load of rubbish out that I was going to commit suicide. I mean, they are pretty unpleasant, and the reach is massive. Once I'd done that, I suddenly found I couldn't get car insurance anywhere in the world for anything less, with an absolutely spotless record of the maximum no claims certificate. Quotes of £15,000 to insure a car. And the car I was driving at the time was worth about 1,500 quid. And I'd got 12 years no claims bonus.
Another individual who suffered at the hands of the whip of the party, the one that controls and puts out disinformation, of course, is Rupert Lowe. You had allegations as well. Andrew might be suicidal. He's had allegations of Rupert has dementia. And for a US audience who are watching, so I asked just for them, less for the UK, who think, well, we've got reform, Nigel's going to speak in all these things. Can you tell them why that position may be incorrect?
Yeah, Nigel's a Trojan horse. I think Nigel was blackmailed. I think he's deeply compromised. When I'd run out of people in Parliament, in our Parliament, I mean, I've known Nigel for probably 10 years. I had dinner with him loads of times. We've spoken on the phone for hours and hours and hours. We've spoken on the same stage, and I went and met with him in front of witnesses after an hour and a half of me giving him where we are on the vaccines. This is in January 2023. Nigel turned around to me and said, Andrew, I am not going to be speaking about the vaccines. And if you know what's good for you, you won't either. That's not leadership. That's something else, Peter. And you know what it is. And your audience know what it is. And I also spoke to Nigel Farage 2 years ago about what was clearly the Europeans and Labour's plan and the Conservatives' plan to take the UK into the European Defence and Securities Union, which it's all coming now, isn't it? And which would give control of our Army, Navy, Air Force, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, our nuclear deterrent, and our local police force to the European Union. That's the deal. And also centralise all procurement and manufacturing, single source manufacturing for weapons, ammunition, and all the other stuff that the military uses across Europe. And I'll have a bet that we won't be getting much of that, especially since we've shut down all our steelworks, basically. It's just an absolute sellout. And I said this to Nigel, and he said, I don't want to talk about that either. Brexit's done as far as I'm concerned, and we're not talking about it. And I've spoken to people in the defence industry in the UK yesterday, and they've contacted Nigel, and he said that Reform will have a position on it and oppose it once Labour finalise it. That is him planning to try and shut the stable door long after the horse has bolted. He was aware of this over 2 years ago when I predicted it was coming forward. And that's the time. See, government legislation and government plans and treaties, you've got to treat them like meteorites heading to Earth. And it's no good trying to deflect them when they're coming in, burning up through the atmosphere. You've got to see them a long way out and give them a nudge, and they miss. You can't stop them once they're coming in to ground zero. And that's where Nigel's going to be, because he has no intention of really opposing that. And I'm afraid, I think he's completely compromised. Information's being given to me, which I can't disclose now, but I mean, I think Nigel will be exiting stage left later this year.
I look forward to that, because Nigel Farage in Downing Street in 2029 doesn't really fill me with hope.
Well,
I
don't think it'll be Nigel, Peter. I don't think it'll be Nigel. Nigel's made it clear he only wants to do 5 years from when he came back into politics. Yep. He's also made it clear he wants to earn a lot of money. And just who's the other shareholder in Reform? There's only one other shareholder.
Mohammed Zia Yusuf.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's pulling the strings. I've seen so many good people in Reform, good candidates at the last election who worked really hard, real patriots, people I've got a lot of time for. And I must have met 40 or 50 of those candidates who've been deselected, and they all finished second. They were all well placed, and they've just been replaced by men and women of Zia and Nigel. It's almost as if he's prepared, and also, the same mainstream media over here, or legacy media over here, whatever they've got left of their viewers and subscribers or whatever, the same legacy media who 10 years ago wouldn't run the story when I gave them all the evidence about the Post Office Horizon scandal. They weren't really interested in the modern slavery in the fast fashion industry in Leicester in 2019. They certainly wouldn't print any of the information that I was giving them over the last 3 years, 4 years about vaccine harms and excess deaths. When they're saying and predicting that Nigel Farage could well be one of the next Prime Minister, doesn't that demonstrate to you he's already in the club? He's got to be, hasn't he? Else they'd cancel him. When I had a sniff for the first time of an interview with a mainstream newspaper since I spoke out on the vaccines on the 13th of December 2022, and my life changed. And I've never been on the media since. And a couple of weeks ago, before the verdict was known, the judgment was known in the case with Hancock, the Telegraph had approached me through an intermediary saying that they were interested in an interview. Mysteriously, as soon as the judgment came out and I'd won, they didn't want to interview me. I mean, I'd have thought they would have been keener to interview me.
Wow. No, it's silence on the media, and possibly that's because of the advertising they got,
But,
that they didn't want to upset advertisers or government control.
well, big pharma's a massive, massive advertiser, and the only reason they put their advertising into our media over here, it's not to sell their drugs. I mean, who goes into the doctor and says, "Oh, can I have some of that? I've seen it in the paper." Nobody. They're prescribed to you. I mean, it is to buy influence so they can stop stories. Um, so, I mean, but I think whatever happens in America, I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to be sorting through the CDC, getting the people on board to go with the new policies. Jay Bhattacharya will be doing the same at the NIH. And when they do suspend all the mRNA and produce all the reasons why, it will have to be reported in the UK. And I think you can see that the Mail Online and a few other newspapers are trying to slowly move their position on the vaccines. They're putting some publicity now out about vaccine harms and excess deaths as they do what we would call, and your American viewers will never have heard of this phrase. I mean, they adopt the reverse ferret position, don't they?
Can There are two other kind of things I want to just touch on as we finish, and that is two international bodies that we have become very familiar to, I think, the public during the COVID tyranny, and that is the WF and the WHO. You've been very vocal on the WHO and that power grab, and there was a tweet you'd put up just days ago from Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the commission or the parliament. I always get it
The
mixed up.
commission.
The commission. And she tweeted, "Excellent news from Geneva, where a first census on the pandemic agreement was reached last night." What does this mean? Because you've got a Trump administration who has pulled out the WHO and
they have, but they officially can't leave until 2026.
Okay.
I mean, this is still dangerous. You've got Ursula von der Leyen, who's unelected. She's appointed as head of the commission, looking to give the sovereignty of European citizens away from, she's unelected and unaccountable, to an even more unelected, unaccountable, non-tax-paying, immune from prosecution due to diplomatic immunity, Director General of the World Health Organization, which is an offshoot of the United Nations. It's all been bought by Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, it was an unholy alliance of them that got Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus appointed in the first place. And I actually remember that the UK government objected to his appointment. At the time, under David Cameron, they objected to that appointment and made protestations. And for Ursula von der Leyen to give those powers away that she has no right to give away to someone who will be able to declare a public health emergency of international concern, take sweeping powers across basically every aspect of people's lives, bypassing all political accountability, do whatever they want, and decide when it's over, when the emergency is over. When am I going to give you your powers back to your sovereign, to your independent parliaments? Well, it'll be a very, very long time. And 84% of the money and funding now for the World Health Organization, the WHO, is coming from external, independent, commercial sources, which are, of course, those vested interests in selling us mRNA vaccines. What could possibly go wrong, Peter? What could possibly go wrong? And also, if you look at the advice, which was only advisory last time that the World Health Organization gave the world, and countries like the UK ripped up well-prepared pandemic responses that had been developed over decades, threw those in the bin, and then went for the WHO's lockdowns, mandates for vaccines, experimental vaccines, masking, social distancing, and it was a disaster. Mental health, economic disaster, medical disaster with the vaccines. The WHO have never even had an investigation into the quality of their advice during the last pandemic. So sure are they that they've got everything right. And those who fail to learn from the mistakes of history are doomed to repeat them. So what we can say is, and it's all in the amendments to the international health regulations and the pandemic agreement, their response would be exactly the same to a future pandemic: lockdowns, masking, social distancing, and experimental 100-day mRNA vaccinations. So it's an absolute disaster. And I hope that the European Union do not give those powers away, but I fear they will. And I fear that Starmer will give them away as well. I've raised all these concerns when I was an MP. Again, 2 years ago, I could see it coming, and it's here now, knocking on the door. And do you think giving those sort of powers to call an emergency and take those sort of powers, do you think that will lead to us having more or less emergencies? I think we'll be having a lot more emergencies, and I think we'll be having them if the rest of the world, apart from America, takes on these two instruments from the WHO. I fear that we'll be mysteriously having another lab leak pandemic release later this year.
So we could be in the situation where the entity that is controlled by the pharmaceutical industry that makes money from a pandemic can announce a pandemic, and then legally all countries are forced to do that. And it could be a situation where the US are not part of that. And that could be a really interesting part of whatever playbook is at hand, with the US being able to actually stand by itself and the world being forced to legally accept this and jump in.
And of course, large companies, multinationals, had preferential positions, that they weren't locked down and closed down, and the small businesses locally all were. So they had a monopoly, and that you saw a huge wealth shift from the poorest to the richest.
We saw that. Your Klaus Schwab stepping down, WF. Just be good to finish your thoughts on that. It's We have seen very few instances of one man having such power. Probably Fauci, the power he wielded in the US, but actually Klaus Schwab on the international side, and he founded the WF back in I think it was the beginning of the 70s, and has just stepped down. Do you think that will is that the beginning of maybe a decline of the power of the WF, or do you think it'll just be changing leadership and just continuing as they have?
I think Schwab has got a very bad reputation, and he could go no further. But it's a baton hand over to the next director general. I don't think their aims, ambitions haven't changed. The way that they and the global elite, I think the World Economic Forum is very much their shop window of how they sell that to the world. And all you're seeing is the salesman being changed because the last one became discredited. But their aims, ambitions are very much the same. I just think that people have probably woken up to it an awful lot more. The fact that it wasn't Tony Blair says to me, and it was rumoured many years ago it was going to be Tony Blair, that they may be a sinking ship, and Teflon Tony Blair doesn't really want to be the rat swimming towards a sinking ship. I hope that's the case, but I mean they're not sunk yet, so they do need to sink.
And of course, Tony Blair has a vital job in the UK, and that's to roll out ID, mandatory ID for us all.
Well, I mean, he's the one that opened the doors to uncontrolled migration, and he wanted ID cards back in the 90s and the early noughties, and now he's trying to sell ID cards or digital ID as the solution to uncontrolled migration. He does have a cheek, but I would also remind your American viewers that when he got into government in '97 with his landslide, he brought in something. The first piece of legislation he brought in was unexpected. It wasn't in his manifesto, and I was perplexed at the time when I saw it. He brought in removing the death penalty from the Treason Act. That was the very first piece of legislation he wanted to get through, and he got through. With hindsight now, you can see why. Because he and all of our senior politicians, certainly I believe, they've committed treason against the people, conspiring with external forces to the detriment of their own people. And it's not even treason. if you're on the public payroll and you commit treason, that is high treason, Peter.
Um, I want to finish off. If people are in the UK, they can come and see you. You're speaking at an event Saturday, 17th of May, and we'll put the link in the description. Taunton Racecourse Conference Centre. Maybe just mention that, and people can click on the link and get a ticket and go and see you if they so wish.
Yes, that would be very good. There are plenty of tickets available, and I'm sure we'll have a very good evening. I spoke in Havant last Friday. That was excellent, and I'll tell you how it is. The unpalatable truths that we have to know.
Well, make sure if you're able and free on that Saturday the 17th from 5 to 10. So Andrew doesn't shortchange you. He gives you his time. So
we do have a break in the middle for a drink, and there might be some refreshments. So, but I'll speak and show a few short films for about 3 hours in all, and then I'll probably do 45 minutes of Q&As, and people stay for the Q&As. And we could do Q&As all night. I mean, they were still there in Havant at 11 o'clock at night, wanting more Q&As, and I answered them.
Well, I'll put that to our viewers here in the UK, and you can go and be part of that. Andrew, always appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for giving us your thoughts on the good news coming out of the US, I think, and maybe the possible implications here on the vaccine. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter.